went to the doctor and he's like, you probably have cancer, which was scary at 18. And then
Totally.
I'm like, and then we eventually found out it wasn't cancer. It was this other internal bleeding autoimmune disease. And I said, how do you get it? He said, we don't know. How do you get rid of it? You don't. And there's just no answers. And so
Welcome to the Kicked in the Junk podcast. This is a podcast where we discuss the low times in life, where we talk about when the things that have just hit us so hard and it feels like we can never recover from injuries to job loss to divorce to career changes to starting up new businesses. We discuss it all and look at the raw emotion that we feel during those times. But more importantly, what would we learn from these low moments and how sometimes those moments catapult us into the next amazing thing that we didn't even see coming. My name's Nathaniel Berg and I'm the host. I hope you enjoy. You ever judge a book by its cover? Or better yet, make an assumption of someone that you really didn't know? Guilty. I've been there. We all have. Well, in this episode of Kicked in the Junk, I have an awesome discussion with Matt Menzel. Matt is a pastor down in Vancouver leading a very large church, and he shares about his Kicked in the Junk moment and how it happened very early when he was a young adult and what his life was like. And it is not what you would expect. The troubles and the trials and the things that he went through blew my mind. And to be honest, when you watch it, you'll see I'm utterly shocked at some of the stuff that went on in his life to get him to where he is now. I learned so much from this discussion. I hope you do as well. And without further delay, we'll get right to the interview. All right, Matt. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. Really appreciate you taking time out of your busy life, away from what you're doing, to just share some of your story and what you're doing, and really just open up about some of the struggles early on with your relationship and just you're starting a new life and you kind of got hit at this big thing. So again, really excited for this because again, I mean, you married my sister, so I've known you for a while, but I feel like every time we talk, I learn so much. And I love how authentic you are and just what you're trying to do. So yeah, I'm just again really excited that you're here, and thanks for being on my show.
yeah, man, happy to be here. I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to talking.
Awesome. So yeah, well, we'll said right now you are a pastor down in Vancouver. I believe it's the biggest church in Vancouver. Is that correct?
Oh, I don't think so.
Oh,
It's a large church in downtown Vancouver.
mhm.
I don't think it's the biggest, but yeah, it's a
Definitely
large
your
ministry
favorite.
for sure. We don't,
Awesome.
who counts size that way anyways,
That's
right?
fair. I love that.
We want health. We want health more than, but honestly, there are some larger churches, not very many downtown. There's maybe one other that's about the same size or a little bit bigger, but it's there's a lot of spirituality down here, not a lot
Mhm.
of not a very big Christian community. So the fact that we have some really healthy and thriving churches is a cool thing in the city for sure.
Absolutely. No,
Yeah.
that's great. And it was really I really want to get into this story because like I said, I remember when you first, me and my sister, or you and my first got married, and I was like, man, this is awesome. I know you guys are so happy, and you guys still are, but you kind of hit this roadblock really early,
Mm,
this big, like,
mhm.
kicked in the junk moment where,
Yeah.
in my head, if I was you, I'd gone, wow, okay, I'm married to one of my dreams. I'm gonna do this. And you started to get into, becoming a pastor, which is an amazing story on its own. And then you get hit, bam, with a lot
Hmm.
of health issues. So maybe we'll just dive into that. And what was your,
Yeah.
kicked in the junk moment? I mean, I'm sure you've had a few, but
Yeah. Well, I mean, it kind of started earlier than that. Like
okay.
when I was just a really small kid, I used to have seizures that almost killed me like four times and
What?
be constantly rushed to the hospital for these things. And so like and actually they start, my parents had our pastor over here in Vancouver when I was a kid and he prayed for me. I never had another seizure.
Wow.
So just through prayer that way. But like then when I was 18, I was pretty healthy from there. But then at 18, I got really sick. I developed this internal bleed. I remember I left it for a few months as most of us would, it'll just go away on
Yeah.
its own. And then finally my another brother-in-law was like, hey, you should go to the doctor. So I went to the doctor and he's like, you probably have cancer, which was scary at 18. And then
Totally.
I'm like, we eventually found out it wasn't cancer. It was this other internal bleeding autoimmune disease. And I said, how do you get it? He said, we don't know. How do you get rid of it? You don't. And there's just no answers. And so I was
Wow.
really angry about that for 2 years. So I did the whole kicked in the junk thing. I was just angry. Like I felt like my plans were all being shut down and I didn't like it. And so
Hmm.
I threw a big temper tantrum for 24
Okay.
months at 18. So from 18 to 20. And it was just like I was just doing everything I knew how to do to get around it, to fight it. And like I was on every kind of drug you can imagine from the doctors, but then just life was a big mess. And it was just a big mess of like cocaine and strip clubs and drunk every day and just in construction and just really unhappy and just trying to like just trying to figure out what is life if you can just get sick like
Mm.
that quickly and everything could be all your plans can be shifted. Like I didn't like this idea, so I was pretty angry. Then at 20, my body just collapsed on me. And so at 20 years old, I spent 6 months in bed. And that was the first time. So that's before I was married. It
Okay.
was 2 years before Missy and I got married. But so I was in bed for 6 months. And that was the first time where this happened, where it was like being coming to coming to the end of myself and just being faced with like absolute weakness was where I learned how to see like how stupid I was,
Mm.
how just like how idiotic this temper tantrum was, and how actually I'm not owed anything in life. No one
Right.
owes me anything. I thought I was entitled to a bunch of stuff, and so when I got sick at 18 and that didn't fit my plan or my sense of entitlement, I was really angry. And then when I hit the bed, I just realized nobody owes me anything. And so that was a big turning point for me. That's like my, if I have like a conversion experience to point to, kind of happened around that time. And
Yeah.
then 2 years later, when Melissa and I got married, I was very sick when we got married. Like I remember I would sleep, with a stack of pillows next to the bed and I would sweat through everything. And then we would lay down a towel, then I would sweat through that. We laid down another one. Like we just got used to this rhythm. I get up in the morning and I'm a carpenter by trade. At that point, I was managing a company out in Vernon, and I would get up in the morning. Missy would help me out of the shower. I
Oh,
would,
wow.
help me get my clothes on. I'd get out the door to work. I'd come home from work. I'd eat dinner. I'd throw it up, and we'd go to bed with the towels and just do it all over again. So I was
Oh
really
my
sick,
God.
but I was kind of by that point I'd been sick for a few years, and I kind of my body had adjusted, but I started to feel like this internal sense of call. Like I just
Okay.
started to feel like, hey, we're being called to something, and nothing to do with the sickness. I just felt like, we were really content. I was content in my work. She was content in her work, and life was kind of going well. But it was sort of like something stirring in us. For us, a lot of it has to do with faith, and so for us, something was
Yes.
stirring. And then for a few months, we sat on it. And then I remember one night we watched a Canucks game because I'm addicted to pain, so I'm a Canucks fan. And I remember we watched a game one night in our apartment in Kelowna, and then uh, after the game, like I can't take it anymore. We got to pray, and so Missy and I got on our knees in our living room and just like prayed, and we said, if you want to change anything, you can change it. We're just going to submit to whatever. And a week later is when I collapsed, and this is the one that you're referencing. I collapsed at my parents' house on a Friday. Um,
Wow.
I wound up in the hospital. They told me I had a week left to live, and
Whoa.
at that point, I had not only the internal like the bleed thing going on, but I also had a runaway case of tuberculosis, which none of us knew about. So half my left lung was taken away from tuberculosis also. But it was also the same week that I remember on the Thursday or the Friday before I collapsed. So this is November 2018. I went to go like buy a bagel at Tim Hortons on my way home from work one day, and my card was declined. And then I tried like a credit card and that was declined. And I collapsed the next day, so I never got to check it out. But then once I got into the hospital, we realized that we'd been the victims of identity theft as well. And so
No.
$40,000 of cash and credit was stolen. And some guy had gone and like took it out all new credit cards in our name. So I'm literally when I'm in the
Oh.
hospital, uh I'm in isolation because of the tuberculosis. So like that I was in bed for a year and 7 months from that point, but I'm in isolation and the bank is on the phone with me and they're saying, hey, there's suspicious activity on your account. We've shut everything down. You can't access any money. They're saying you're going to have to come into the bank to fix this. And I'm saying, I'm in isolation right now and I'm
Oh
not allowed
my
to
God.
move or to leave this room and nobody can come see me without a hazmat suit on. So they didn't believe my story. And so we prayed a week earlier, whatever you want to change, go ahead and change it. And then all of a sudden I've got
Everything.
no health, no guarantee of, future, no access to money. We had to move out of the apartment. We didn't know I'd be in bed for a year and 7 months, but with all the surgeries and stuff that I had to go through as well, like that's what it ended up being. But this moment, just like the first time, was like the closest thing to like a conversion experience and me like
Mm,
really seeing myself with clarity. This second time was actually our call to ministry, and we like, everything about that circumstantially should have made us terrified, but we were really excited because these terrible things we felt were clear answers to our prayer.
mm,
And yeah, that's kind of, I've learned that like the emptying and a deep realization of weakness is actually like those are the moments of clarity. Those are the moments
yeah.
where you discover like, who am I? What do
Yeah.
I want? What do I have? What is life for? It's those emptying, or as you would say, those kicked in the junk moments that really they're massive gifts in our lives. And obviously we've had a
Yeah.
lot more than that, but the health one for me has been an ongoing one now for the last 20 years or so. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, first of all, there's so much impact there that I didn't even know about. And I'm laughing because I'm like, that that blows my mind. First of all, I didn't know the fraud.
Mm.
That's, and of course, like I said, it's literally at the worst time ever.
Yeah.
Like it couldn't get any worse. And, you are in this just terrible moment again.
Mhm.
But it's interesting that you had those, you had that prayer and these things happen. And I've seen this a few times now with some of these interviews where it's like somebody's like, hey, this is what they want. They're putting in their path, they're going, this is what I want, whether
Mhm.
they're praying, whether they're meditating, whether they're just have these goals, and then all of a sudden, bang, something big happens that initially is like, this is awful. Why is this happening to me? What the hell?
Mhm.
But it's wild that you change the meaning,
Mhm.
which is so critical. And I think people don't do enough is they don't realize like these are these little moments that you can bear down on that meaning and go, yeah, this is bad, and this, and dive into that.
Mhm.
Or you can go, no, you know what? This is what I want. I can flip this story because this is now pushing me to do this.
Mhm.
Right. So,
Yeah, that's huge. That's really big thing. I think that like I don't know, like, and being a leader of an organization and like leading through a lot of change, a lot of transition. Now, we got a large staff team and a large community of people with us. And I think that like in leadership, learning that lesson, what you just described, like being able to see conflict as
mm,
opportunity, to see the emptying moments, like the deep emptying, as the only, like as a real prerequisite to ever being full or filled up,
mhm,
to see like when our plans are taken away from us, to see that as a positive rather than a
yeah,
negative, I think is essential. Like
yeah,
I wanted to be in ministry. I thought, when I was younger and stuff, but my big plan was to be independently wealthy before I went into ministry, because I didn't want to have to be dependent on like a
yeah,
church or a group of people for anything. And so back in those days, we were like, I was investing a lot, and I was running that company, but I was also doing my mutual funds and selling life insurance and doing all that kind of stuff. Like I'd written all my exams, and I was getting into that
well,
industry on the side as well, and trying to make as much money as possible. And so when the identity theft happens, and it wasn't just my body, but it was also money. The other thing that
yeah,
happened there, that was November 2008. So that was when the market crashed. Like we went through this massive market crash in '08, and everything that we had put in to our investments was now worth 50%, like
oh,
everybody else's, because of this massive market crash. The difference was because I just wound up in the hospital, and because all of our funds just shut down and we had no access to money, we had to pull everything out. So we had to live, like what we lived on for the next however long was all of our investments that were supposed to be for the future. And so it
mm,
was like I had like this like triple layered lesson that I was being
yeah,
taught, which was like, my plans were actually worth next to nothing.
huh,
And but not that they're not good, just that it's like we have to be able to let go of the
Mm.
way that we see things, how we want things to go in order to like be
Yes.
available for what's
Yes.
actually going to happen in front of us.
Totally. And that's such a good lesson because I mean, and there's a lot I want to unpack here. There's a
Mhm.
lot I want to dive into, but even just to touch on that, it's like, yeah, how many people that you know and talk to and they, oh, this is what I planned. But if you get so narrowed in on that one thing, so narrowed in on it that you don't realize, like, yeah, you could have this, but you actually have this great world over here. But if you just open up
Yeah.
the blinders and realize, like, allow for possibility, right?
Mhm.
Allowing for that, you don't might not have the best plan right now, but if you keep your mind open and you keep a good headspace and your heart in the right place, these things will
Yeah.
open up. So,
Yeah.
all right, to go back to let's kind of dive into that a little bit.
Mhm.
You went through a lot of people would describe as hell,
Mhm.
and I think and fair point. Um, how did that? What kind of stress that put on your relationship with you and Melissa
Yeah.
and your wife? And
Mhm.
what were some things that you guys did to
Mhm.
stay together and
Yeah.
make sure you weren't drifting apart? Because a lot of people, that's going to rip them apart in a heartbeat, and you
Yeah.
guys didn't. So what were some
Yeah,
things? So what
man.
was the stress like, and what were some things?
Oh yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it was massively stressful
Hmm.
because I had no income for the next year and 7 months, and Melissa, had to go to work. Then we had to live off our investments, that sort of thing. But the physical toll that I was going through as well, with like multiple surgeries and like just terrible, terrible things, like not just being in bed and in pain, but like I had ostomy bags and all this terrible stuff where it's like, and
Yeah.
like Melissa became not only our primary, breadwinner, but a full-time nurse. Like she would
Yeah.
literally leave the house, and her husband is we're married for just over a year at this point, and her husband of a year plus is on the floor rolling around in pain. She comes home from work. I'm in the exact same place. Like all of life, like we have so many memories we look back on of just me passing out in pain, like in her
Wow.
arms as she's
Oh my
like
God.
cleaning me and taking care of, like it was terrible, man. Like the things, like we have some terrible, like I remember as I went through some surgeries and like they all kinds of things, like they had my intestine was like outside of my body and
Oh.
flipped over and searched to itself, like just disgusting things. I remember looking in the mirror and just weeping,
Oh.
and there's Melissa, like just like serving nonstop. I'm doing nothing. I'm just in and out of the hospital for a year and 7 months, and she's serving, working, never once complaining, never once
Mhm.
pushing back. Like if there's ever a point in time, I mean, I marry a lot of people. I officiate a lot of marriages and weddings, and you
Yeah.
see a lot of people splitting up and stuff like that. And it's like what she went through was just like, I mean, her husband, she went from marrying this guy and like starting a new life together to just like I'm not a very big guy. I'm like 6 feet tall. I was down to 114 pounds, like just a skeleton of a guy,
Mm.
always in pain,
Yeah.
absolutely disgusting. And somehow she's serving, and and there's a lot of lessons we could find a lot of lessons. They're happy to talk about all that stuff. Like we look back on that now though, and like we that was a beautiful season for us. That was
Mm.
actually a really special time of our marriage. It was
Uh,
really hard, but it was where we learned who we are and where we
mm.
realized that, like, you could take anything away.
Yeah.
I could just die. Like we might not have decades together. Maybe we only have a year together. And
Yeah.
I could
Yeah.
just it could just end, and that's actually okay. And
Yeah.
we might not ever have any money. And that's actually okay. We might, in your marriage vows often, for richer, for poor, in sickness and in health. And like we
Yeah.
were living through that in those first
She
years.
stuck through it. Yeah.
Yeah. But like, it was faith. Like
Yeah.
for Melissa, just like for me, like she knew that our prayers were being answered. And for her, I mean, we talked about this actually not that long ago. Like that season of our marriage in some ways was like the easiest thing we ever did, because
Really.
it was so intense that your whole focus just narrows. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and whereas like the problem when things are easy is
Yeah.
that you don't know what to focus on. And so
Yeah.
then you start to be led around by, maybe I want this, maybe I want that. Like I've got this impulse and it's leading me this way. And as people, especially in our generation, we're so introspective
Mhm.
and we're so focused on what we feel. And so those things like lead us apart from each other. I often see, people in marriage like being led apart from their spouses just because they're the way they feel. But
Mhm.
in a season of crisis like that, it's like it's just survival. But for us, it was survival, but it was also call. And
Mm.
so we were supercharged through that, like
Wow.
there were many, many months in the hospital and lots of recovering from lots of different surgeries. But we also in that time I was studying and we started interviewing like in the middle of all that sickness. We started interviewing
Wow.
for things and doors started to open for us. I remember just being like
Wow.
deathly ill and sitting in
Wow.
these interviews with people, Melissa and I there together, and we're not qualified for any of the things we're interviewing for. We're
Yeah.
taking swings that are way over our head,
Mhm.
and doors are opening. Like they're
Yeah.
closing for other people, but they're opening for us. Like people can see,
Yeah.
people also get to look into your life in moments like that, and they get to see things that
Yeah.
otherwise you wouldn't. And so like doors began to open through there, and it was an
That's good.
amazing time actually for us. And our marriage,
Wow.
I feel like has the last 16 years. We've been married now for 16, and
Wow.
I think that it's just been like because we had that near the beginning,
Yeah.
everything else we faced is
Uh,
kind of a cakewalk.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I think about it now, especially with what you're saying, it's like with that type of, even just from a real simple level, trust that is built with that. Really, like you were literally, like I said, I mean, I saw you a few weeks back and you look like you stepped out of a magazine, right? As like, you're all, you're putting on muscle again, looking good.
Yeah.
So I would never think that you'd been ever 115 or whatever it was pounds,
Yeah.
shriveled up in pain, crying.
Yeah.
And, and so to have somebody, have a partner that doesn't even flinch when you're at that moment,
Yeah.
if that doesn't build trust, I don't know what does.
Yeah. Oh,
Right?
fully. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so to build that trust is just, yeah, of course, anything from that, it's like, man, we went through,
Yeah.
again, hell. And now, of course, yeah, in perspective, it's easier. And like you said, I think, when you're at that moment, things narrow. And
Hmm.
all the thing that matters right now is just being here and being alive and
Hmm.
maybe it also taught you to be to value the moment, to value presence, true
Hmm.
presence, because you didn't have
Hmm.
much, you might not have that much time.
Yeah.
And I think then maybe when you're doing those interviews, maybe that was it, is like, how many people do you know that put on a mask, right?
Yeah.
Because of fear, because of all this stuff. But when you're faced with the end,
Yeah.
or what could be the end,
Yeah.
you realize that it's okay. That mask can come off and I can be authentic and true to who you are. And people
You kind of
see
got
that.
nothing to lose, right? There's nothing
Yeah.
to lose. And so you end up making decisions and you end up putting yourself out there in ways that
Yeah.
when you feel like you can lose everything, you're too
Yeah.
afraid to do. But when everything's
Yeah.
taken from you, you're actually in this place of deep freedom where you can
Yeah.
now everything's already gone. Like, what are you afraid of? So you just start saying what you
Oh,
think. You
yeah.
start you start express and you really get to the bottom of what's the most important thing to us.
Yeah.
And that was where we decided, we got to be part of the church and we've got to move to
Mhm.
Vancouver because, that's where the most people in our province are. And so it's like, it just started to narrow, like, what are we after? What do we care about? What's driving
Yeah.
us? Why are we alive? Like you start
Yeah.
asking all those questions and what an opportunity that is. Like most people can go their whole lives and never ask those kind of questions or never be free enough to go pursue those things. And when everything gets taken from you like that, you kind of the worst already happened. So go for it, like throw it all out there. And yeah, it would be good if we could live that way all the time. If we could
Mhm.
constantly remember that. I mean, I think about this, scripture. I think about this one psalm where the psalmist just says, like, you know, teach me to number my days that I may gain a heart of wisdom.
Yeah.
And it's like
Yep.
this idea of like just let me know how fleeting I am, like let me know how short this life is so
Yeah.
that I can understand like that I can actually
Yes.
just give it all away because it's when we think we're invincible, it's when we think that like life
Mhm.
is some long thing that that's when we get too afraid. It's like, well, I don't want to make a mistake because if I make a mistake, it's over.
Mhm.
Once you realize like, you don't have to be afraid. This thing's short anyways. You can get it kind of get that courage to just do what you think is most important, what matters the most.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, again, not enough people do that. And the cool part is about that is that that can apply to anybody.
Yeah.
It's not, it's not something that you have to be literally, like you said, sweating through towels every night and sick.
Yeah.
You can implement this now. And I feel like too many people in our lives, or people that we might know, and society, is we're giving our attention, we're giving our time away to
Hmm.
things that we really don't care about. I mean, that really don't matter to what their values are, right?
Hmm.
Or again, putting these things that they seem valuable, but when they really boil it down, it's like that's not important to them. So where are you putting
Hmm.
your attention? And having that reminder is a good thing. So I guess my question is, what are things you do to remind yourself to go all out there and put your heart out there,
Hmm.
and to keep just living in your truth and who you are?
Hmm. That's a good question. I agree with you. I think that a lot of people live with like a deep incongruity between what they care about, what they
Mm,
value, and actually the what their life actually looks like.
yeah. And where they spend their
And
time.
yeah, exactly. And that actually that's like that cognitive dissonance that like, I believe this to be true, but I live this other way.
Yep.
After a while, that can start to make you feel like you're going crazy. That can start to make you feel like life just doesn't match up. And I think a lot of the reason for some of the depression and
Hmm.
some of the deep anxiety that seems to be growing like wildfire in our culture is because I think largely we've forgotten like what are our lives for. So for
Hmm.
me, I often say to the people in our church, as a pastor, I think that um I kind of have a forced spiritual formation plan
Hmm.
because every week is a spiritual crisis in ministry. And so the good thing about that for me is like my rhythms, my schedule daily, my day-to-day schedule, my weekly schedule, monthly, yearly schedules, like I've really got them formed around what I believe, what Melissa believes, are the most important things in life. And then what
Hmm.
I'm doing for work day to day is deeply tied into that. So the tough thing about that kind of a life is that there's really no break between work
Hmm.
and the rest of life. It's kind of all one thing. Like what Melissa and I care about more than anything else in the world and what we talk about at home and what we're talking about late at night in bed and what we're doing first thing in the morning and on our weekends is the same thing I do for work. And so that's a gift because everything's focused, but it's also
Yeah.
tough because there you don't get that, that break in a
Yeah.
certain
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. Which
But
is
I
good.
think,
You
yeah,
need
it
that.
is good. I
You need
think
that.
the biggest thing though, the biggest way that I would respond to your question, because I think what keeps us, and I think this applies to all of us, it's not just a spiritual thing.
Hmm.
Um, I think fear was one of the
Yeah.
most crippling forces in the world.
Yeah.
And I think that the whole idea of like, teach me to know teach me to number my days that I may gain a heart of wisdom.
Hmm.
It's this idea that like you have nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah.
It's this idea that like, look, like we are here only for a time. There is nothing to be afraid of. We can't take any of this stuff with us.
Yeah.
So if you were able to let go of all fear, if you were able to live
Mm.
fearlessly, what would you do? What would
Yeah.
you want to do? Because
It's a
fear is a
great
terrible
question.
master.
Yeah.
Fear just is paralysis. Like, and so it's like I think a lot of people are very afraid of winding up in a place where they can't retire or they can't, they don't experience the comfort or satisfaction or whatever. And so that fear keeps us enslaved to
Mm.
a lot of lesser things. And so the
Yeah.
one thing that I really make a practice of is actually confronting my fears.
Yeah.
It's the things that I'm afraid of. Um, like I try as much as I can, and it's painful,
Hmm.
often very, very painful, but I try to lean into my fears. And
Hmm.
when I notice I'm afraid of something, I look for an opportunity to actually engage with that and often sometimes the thing is I'm most afraid of, I try to run from the most, but they have a way, and I think it's a spiritual reality too. Those things have a way of coming at me. The
Yeah.
fears I try to avoid are going to get forced on me. And the ones I choose are actually a lot less painful to move through. But I think actually the confrontation with fear is probably the biggest way to be able to live that as a unified whole with a sense of coherence between what you believe is true
Yeah.
and how you live your life. I think it's that confrontation with fear, I'd say.
Absolutely. I think that's such a good answer, and something I've always tried to, for the last, many years, is just go at things with no fear. Because how
Yeah.
many times, again, you said it, how many times does fear stop us? How many
Mhm.
times or how many people do you know rather that, well, oh, I didn't try. Well, why? Well, I was afraid of this. I was scared of that. And
Yeah.
it's like, on your deathbed, are you going to be, like, what are you going to talk about? Right. You're going to be talking about,
Mhm.
oh man, people say that all the time. Well, I wish, wish I wasn't afraid of this or did that or tried this. And, and there's something freeing too about not even about shooting the shot, but then even if it doesn't stick, it's like, man, I had the courage,
Mhm.
because the fear is still there. It doesn't go away, but you had the courage to take that shot. Right. So, and I think, like you said, I think that's the question, is like, can you let go of fear? Or if you were to let go, or if you were to just, those things that you're afraid of, if you were to put them aside, what would you be doing? Like, if there was no fear in your life.
Mhm.
Right. And it's such a good, easy question that anybody can ask themselves right now and look at, and make a difference and benefit their lives, because that could, spark a shift as it did
Yeah.
you. So speaking of no fear, I guess my question then would be, you went from, again, like I said, you were 115 pounds. You got, the fraud, the and you started this calling because you felt this calling of becoming a pastor. I mean, obviously there was some fear there, but what were some things you did that made you feel confident in stepping into that field? Because
Mhm.
as you said, you were unqualified,
Mhm.
right? Like but you shot the shot, right? You jumped
Mhm.
in. So what were some things you did to make sure that you felt that you could do that, and maybe some wisdom there?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is that uh, we defined right away what it was that we felt called to. We didn't let
Hmm.
other people define that for us. So like one specific example of that was so I was just recovering. I was just starting to walk again. And I remember we'd been through a series of interviews already, and some people were interested in doing some things with us down here in the city. And this one pastor came up to interview us for a job at a large ministry, kind of an exciting thing. And I remember we were walking around in West Kelowna just talking a bit, and he was putting some things on the table that were good opportunities,
Hmm.
but were not the opportunities that were important to us.
Yeah.
And I remember like just having the courage to say no to the
Okay.
things that were not the right things was as
Yeah.
important as us saying yes to things we didn't want. So what I mean is like
Hmm.
he was given some opportunities where like one of the things early on we found out was like you have to just say yes. You have to, once you open doors, you just got to start walking through doors, and
Yeah.
but you also have to define for yourselves like what are our non-negotiables.
Yeah.
And within that framework, you've got to be as fearless to say no as you have to be to say yes. So I remember saying no to some things and hoping to still get the job. And then we heard back from them and they said, they said no to us because, and the big reason was, we weren't willing to do everything that he was asking for, but some of the things that he was asking for, we didn't feel were for us.
Hmm.
And so from there, that was like a big failure. That was a moment of like where the people who had already kind of come alongside us and were signing off on us and were wanting to support us, where they were disappointed because
Hmm.
I failed in that interview process. And so from that point, other doors opened up. It's actually a funny story because a door totally different opened up here after that one closed. A door over here on the right opened up, and then I ended up coming in another way into that same ministry and actually working alongside that guy who interviewed me and said no after I said no.
Hmm.
And we've become friends, like, and we started working together,
Mhm.
and that now we're peers in ministry. But we both look back on that, and I just realized that the courage to say no
Mhm.
at that point was as significant as the ability to say yes. And so
Mhm.
defining what we really like, what it was for us was really important. I think if you just go out there and you say, we're just going to go with the flow, whatever happens, happens. I think that can sound good. That can sound like you're really available and you're really open. I think it's pretty dangerous though, because um, I think you have to have some amount of framework for what do I want? Like, what are we
Yeah.
feeling called to? What is
Yeah.
it that's most important to us? And then you got to stick with that. And again, the bottom can fall out, and you might end up, you know, nothing comes of it, and you
Yeah.
look back and wonder if you made mistakes. But I think I think it's essential
Mhm.
to I think it's essential to know what you're actually going after, and then having the courage to say yes and the courage to say no.
Absolutely. I think, you know, you just kind of said it right the way, and I went, "Oh man, yeah, this is on something." And it's funny the parallels between being a pastor and being a coach and being a,
Mhm. Yeah.
somebody that's a counselor or whatever. And it's like it's the same thread that,
Mhm.
what you said, what do you want?
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
And most people know what they don't want. They don't know what they want.
Mm.
Right. So getting very clear on what you want, which is so,
Mhm.
so critical, and nothing like a life, potentially ending experience to get clear on what you want.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right? Because like you said, you were asking these questions, well, why am I on this earth? Why am I
Mhm.
here? Like I want to, if I'm here, I want to make an impact. Is that would, if I was
Mhm.
in your shoes, that would be my thing. I want people to, I
Mhm.
want to be able to make some sort of impact. So I think that's
Mhm.
awesome. So I know we talked about this before, but you know, daily habits is really what can define a person. So for example, if you work out every day, I'm going to know because it shows, right? So
Mhm.
what are some daily habits you do to keep yourself in a mindset of one, knowing what you want, right?
Mhm.
Not being distracted because you are, leading a group of people to just
Mhm.
become better humans, really,
Mhm.
which I think is so awesome. So what are some of your daily habits you do to just keep that mindset? And then
Mhm.
to, also to keep your life a little bit separate from that.
Mhm.
And then even some habits and things you guys do for you and Melissa to just because I always say it's not you, Matt, Matt, the pastor. That's
Mhm.
just a part of you,
Yeah.
right? Still you and in all these things. So how do you still put energy into all those things? What are some things you do?
Yeah, it's good. It's a good question, man. I think I agree with you. I think habits are really important. And there's thankfully been a lot of work done on habits last little bit, like that Atomic Habits book and others, so where they just you just see that um, these little things that we do are so formative in our lives. And so
Mhm.
I try to look at, I see the from a theological perspective, I see us as human beings kind of broken down into these three different parts, like body, soul, and spirit.
Mhm.
And so I try to have like habits and a formation plan for each of those. So the body's obvious, and like I think physical exercise for me is really important. Like we've talked about this even just this summer and things, but I've got habits that have to do with my physical health.
Mhm.
Because we can't control our physical health. I've learned that a number of times. So as much control as I do have over like how healthy my body is and how good my nutrition is, I want to try to pay attention to that. That's fun. That's
Mhm.
enjoyable. And but then, for me, the soul is this is the place for our mind, will, and emotions. This is the place of like the intellect, desire, and what we feel, what we think, what we want, what we feel. And so, I every day, my day begins actually with trying to deal with my soul, trying to deal with my
Mhm.
mind, will, and emotions. And the way I do that is actually by surrendering those three things. But
Mhm.
like so every day begins with just a surrendering of what I think, what I feel, what I want. Those three
Okay.
things. I begin by letting those things go. I
Yeah.
begin by reminding myself that what I think, what I feel, what I want, none of that is actually objective reality. That's all stuff that like is actually going to change. Like how I think is going to change, how I feel is going to change, what I want is going to change. And so one of the problems I think that happens for a lot of people, and I know this has happened in my life too, is when the soulish stuff, what we think, what we feel, what we want, when that becomes the authoritative stuff,
Right.
like that leads to a world of hurt because like we're just constantly changing. And so I surrender what I think, what I feel, what I want. And I try to go to this place instead where what I would call the spirit, which is this place of communion with something bigger than myself. You know, so I know a lot of people will try to do the same thing through different forms of meditation and all
Yeah.
that. And for me, it's communion. It's a very specific person that I'm trying to connect with there. For
Mhm.
me as a Christian, as a pastor,
Yeah.
but that place of communion is the place of saying, instead of what I think and feel and want, I want what you think and feel and want. And so
Right.
let me as a person be caught up in you instead of me. And
Yeah.
so that shift, and I do that a number of different ways. Like sometimes it's reading, sometimes it's prayer, sometimes
Mhm.
it's just going for a walk, and just like sometimes it's just sitting in silence. Like silence and solitude is something I practice a lot. And it's
Right.
just where it's actually where you just, and I know that you practice a lot of meditation.
Mhm.
For me, that silence is like I'll do kind of a breathing technique just to remind myself of like
Okay.
where I am. And then I usually will take like a verse of scripture
Yeah.
and just sit in it. Like, for example, for months and months, a little while ago, I was using just Psalm 18, verse 1, which is just, I love you, O Lord, my strength. Just
Mm.
that idea of
Yeah.
being in
Yeah.
love and like being strengthened from this place of love. And I
Yeah.
would just sit there, and that was like my anchor, and I would just sit with him like that. And so that to me, and then what I do, I have like another habit is I have like on my watch, I have reminders at 9 a.m., at 12 p.m. and 3 p.m. every single day. My alarm goes off, and it's an alarm that reminds me to get back to the surrendering of my soulish stuff, what I think, feel, want, and exchange it for his, what he thinks and feels and wants. And so I remind myself of what I believe is objective reality. And I try as much as I can to bring myself back to objective reality
Yeah.
throughout my day. And I find that like 9 and 12 and 3 is just survival. Like if I start this way in the morning, it's great. But then you start working for an hour, and like all of a sudden you're just right back into your own stuff. And so I
Mhm.
need it at 9 o'clock. Someone remind me at 9 o'clock, like AM. Who am I? What am I doing here? Then at 12 and at 3. And by the time I get home, I need Melissa to remind me again. It's just like, because it's just like the world is constantly telling us, like,
Yeah.
follow
Yeah.
your own heart, pay attention to what you want, pay attention to what you think. And for me, it's like those things there's value in those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if they're the authoritative thing in your
Yeah.
life, for me, I feel like, because I've already come to the end of myself a few times where
Yeah.
it's like, that would be the end. If
Mhm.
my plans were the authoritative things for my life, because my almost none of my plans work out, and then my life ends up looking completely different from what I thought it would. So
Yeah. But for the
I
better.
try to align myself with that reality as much as I can.
I love that. And I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said it. It's not that your own feelings and emotions, what you want, don't have value. They do.
Yeah.
But I think you said it there, and I think this is a really good lesson. Is it's not the end all be. It's not the authoritative
Yeah.
voice. And I think because when it is a good example, if you have this idea in your head that I don't know, whatever, you're gonna go to the gym and you're gonna have this perfect body and blah,
Hmm.
whatever, right? Sometimes things go astray.
Yeah. You break your
Right?
arm.
Yeah, you break your arm, you tear something, a disc, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
or I don't know, you have to move, you have to do something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like these things happen. So it's not that those things that you want are bad. They're, the idea, especially the intention's good, but just allowing that these other things happen, and it's allowing for that
Mm-hmm.
movement, and
Yeah.
especially when you are grounded with who you are
Hmm.
and who you want to be, and not just emotionally, but spiritually and mentally, and with your why, right? You're
Hmm.
aligned with your
Hmm.
why, and you know your why so clearly now, which is
Hmm.
so beautiful and such a great thing because, you know, it allows you to come back to that easier. It's more
Hmm.
motivation to come back to, okay, right,
Hmm.
I need to go
Hmm.
back to where I am. So No, I love that. And it gets away from the focus on me and it becomes
Mhm.
about we.
Yeah.
Because really, when you look at, I mean, really, if you look at any spiritual leader or anybody trying to, truly, when you look at their heart and who they are and they're trying to impact other people's lives, it's about we, right? They're
Mhm.
trying to help other people, right? And by doing that, it's a constant reminder for yourself that it's not what I want right now. Oh, I want this meeting to go this way. And then the meeting gets canceled
Mhm.
and then you're upset. But then you walk down the road, you go for walks, you're upset,
Mhm.
and you meet somebody else. And oh my
Mhm.
God, I had this amazing conversation with this person. And that
Mhm.
wouldn't have happened unless that meeting, but
Yeah.
if I'm so angry because it didn't go my way,
Yeah.
then I don't see that this person here needs this conversation, just needs me to be a human to them
Yeah.
and open up my heart. And it could lead to something beautiful, or it could just be an amazing interaction that made their day better,
Yeah. No,
right?
that's
But
big. Being able to be present with people is a big, like I think what you said there is right. Our mind, will, emotions, like those things I'm calling like soulish things,
yeah.
like those are not bad things. Those are actually
Mhm.
really good and important things. What I've found, like the place of safety and the place of joy is when what I think and feel want is actually the expression of something that's actually bigger and better than me objectively.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so when what I think and feel want becomes the expression of something better, and what that means, what I think, feel, want can change, but it's always expressing this better thing.
Mhm.
That that's freedom. That
Yeah.
now lets me be released so that because if I'm otherwise, it's just pure ego,
Yeah.
and that's all it is ego. Where what I think and feel, want, this is all that I care about. You're right. Then I become entirely focused on me. It's
Mhm.
like you don't know what I'm thinking, you don't know what I'm feeling, you don't know what I want. And and every person I look at becomes a means to me achieving my own ends. And now we get toxicity and abuse and manipulation and all these other
Mhm.
things where if I can actually, and I'm, we're working on this, right? Like I've definitely
Yes.
not achieved this, but like working on it. Like if I can
Yeah.
move myself to the side
Yeah.
and I can become just the expression of these bigger and better things. That's actually allowed me, and because I'm not good at this historically, but I think I'm getting better. When I'm with people, I remind myself to like look in their eyes
Yeah.
and just like remember that there's nowhere else I need to be right now
Yeah.
because I'm only able to do that when I'm free of my own thoughts, feelings, emotions driving me authoritatively. Now I can talk to you or I can talk to somebody else, and you can actually have that moment of presence where they feel like they're as important to you and as important in this moment as anything else. And now we're
Mhm.
actually like humanizing each other. And so I think one of the big problems is the message we get from our world constantly and like from every Disney movie and from
Mhm.
everything else. And it's not entirely wrong. It's just not complete. This idea to follow our hearts is like our hearts are yes, we need to pay attention to what we think and feel and want. But if we're all just trying to follow our hearts, it means we're all just looking out for number one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now we're in competition with everybody everywhere we go, and that creates a really tough society to like to humanize one another and to treat each other well, which I think is a
Mhm.
really great byproduct of what you're talking about.
Absolutely. And you said is that if everybody's looking out for number one, well, what kind of environment is that?
Mhm.
Right. And when we step away from that, we can have such a better world. And again, it's not to except don't disclude it, but really it takes a lot of knowing your why, I think, too, right? Which is so big. And I think and your why really, or you can call it your purpose.
Mhm.
And I mean, look at anybody that that has that knows their purpose. They're driven and they're there and they're committed to it and for the better.
Mhm.
Typically, but what you'll also see is that when people have that purpose that is solely self,
Mhm.
when they get there, they're go, well, now what? I've been
Mhm.
there before with different starting
Mhm.
businesses and helping, in different sales and all that sort of stuff. And you get there and you're excited for what, a minute, 10
Mhm.
minutes, an hour, maybe a day or a week, but then what?
Mhm.
Then it's empty after. And
Yeah.
then you're like, well, now what? What do I do?
Yeah.
But when it's away from that, it lasts when it's about others. it's
Mm-hmm.
just so much more fulfilling.
Yeah.
And it lasts, right?
Yeah.
And then you want that more because you're like, right, I'm making an impact. That's like kind of, you're changing someone else's life.
Yeah.
And to touch on the presence part, yeah, we need that more in society.
Mm-hmm.
We have devices in our pockets, all of us,
Mm-hmm.
that want our attention, want our presence. And the
Mm-hmm.
more we get used to doing this and
Mm-hmm.
not being engaged with someone, the more we become, like you said, we're not human anymore,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're becoming just objects and things. And when this is constantly trying to grab us. So
Yeah.
having that presence true presence is in my opinion, the best thing you can give somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can go one step further, is being open-hearted about it.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can be present, but you can kind of be closed off and not
Mm-hmm.
be willing to share and not be willing to listen, or just kind of listen but not really. But if you're truly open-hearted, having that open heart, it can
Yeah.
make such a huge impact in somebody's life. And even for your sake, I mean, for your own story, you're in front of crowds of people a lot of the time, right? So you're not, I think about it now, I'm like, well, that would be different, because if you're looking, if 1,000 people, it's hard to, you're
Yeah.
not staring someone face to face. You're just talking
Yeah.
to a group.
Yeah.
So
Which is a totally different thing, right? Because
yeah,
now you're addressing the community of people,
yes,
and you're actually speaking to the community as one.
yes,
And that's where, like, I've got, lots of staff who do more one-on-one stuff. I do mostly like to the community as a whole. And so it is a different thing, but you have to have a sense of what's happening in the community as a person,
yeah,
and you speak to that, but its presence is just as important with that. Like, and
yeah,
I find that
yeah,
like that, even when I get up on a Sunday to speak, for example, to the group, it's, I'm walking up and I'm reminding myself of these same things we're talking about. Like, I'm trying to empty myself as I'm on my way up to speak. I'm emptying myself of what I think, what I feel, what I want, and I'm just saying, like, I want to exchange this.
mhm,
I want to let go of this stuff, and I want to let this be. And so I often will stand there, just like pause for a second, and I try to listen. And I'm listening while I'm speaking, because it's that presence that is actually, I think, is really everything. For
yeah,
sure. I like the way you put that.
totally. I mean, even to dive in that path, I mean, look at what Jesus did, and
Mhm.
I always try to example my life, at least that's my own, is like, look, I've read the Bible, most of it.
Mhm.
I know what Jesus was trying to do.
Mhm.
He's trying to love people, and
Mhm.
he gave them their presence. So, what better role model that we could all learn from, whether you believe it or not. We know he existed, no matter what faith he existed,
Mhm.
and he did some good things for
Mhm.
sure. So amongst amazing other stuff,
Yeah, yeah,
but he was present with people, and he
yeah,
didn't. And you could see his intention. His intention wasn't there to be like, hey, you did wrong, you did this. It's like, hey, I'm just going
yeah,
to be with you right now for where you are.
yeah,
And what an amazing thing. And really, we could all use more of that,
yeah,
and help, because when you allow that, when you're present with someone, you allow them to be seen and
yeah.
be heard. And sometimes even just doing that can help somebody heal.
Yeah, that's big. And I actually, like, I mean, that's actually, I had a prof once who would say, like, the entire, you know, arc of all of the Bible, of all of Scripture, can be tied up in three things that God just says over and over and over again in the Bible, and we see it
Mhm.
in Jesus. But he says, like, these three lines are repeated all over Scripture, and they're all about presence.
Mhm.
I will be your God. You will be my people. I will dwell among you.
Mhm.
And then when Jesus comes, like, the way the prophets describe him, what they call him is, they call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. And then what do we see Jesus as he walks around, just like you said? He was so good at being present with people. This is actually one of the reasons he was so hated in his life by the people with power, especially religious people with power, because he was present with all the wrong people. He was present with the marginalized and with the
Yep.
oppressed and with the
Yep.
people who didn't have any power in society. And Jesus was so present with them
Yep.
and spent so much time with them and valued them so highly. And this is the thing. I think this is the call of, I think this is what we need in our world, is people. And I think if you're, for people who are, religious, spiritual, or would even identify as Christians, it's like the call is actually to be present with what we would call God, what other people would call higher power, whatever. But
Mhm.
like, to be present vertically so
Yeah.
that we can be present inwardly, so that we can be
Yeah.
present horizontally. It's
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
inward, it's this upward, inward, outward kind of
Yeah.
like these trajectories. It's like, but they each require relational connection.
Yep.
And these things here are like the
Hmm.
death of relational connection.
Yeah.
And then
Yep.
we're connected to that here, we're connected to it here. We're just always buzzing and vibrating, and like you're sitting in
Yeah.
meetings with people and everyone's checking their phones and checking their watches, and it's just like
Yeah.
we've lost
Yeah.
presence. And
Yeah.
I think that is such a big part of so much of our dysfunction, is because we're all building our own little brands. We're all building these things on the side. And so we've
True. Yep.
forgotten like how important we are,
Yeah.
together. And actually that's where your joy and my joy and our joy is supposed to come from, is like
Hmm.
finding our place together in a community and living for the good of one another. And those are things we see exemplified in a lot of religions. And we
Hmm.
see that definitely in Jesus. Like
Yeah.
that's a big part of the reason why so many religions and almost every major world religion looks to Jesus and says he's a great person to learn from, because
Yeah.
he exemplified that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's, I want to dive down this path so much further because we could unravel so much. And it's such an amazing topic because again, it really, I always look at things in the who can learn from this, and really anybody can learn from this stuff, which is so cool, whether you're an atheist or you're devoted Christian or you're somewhere in between, and it
Mm.
doesn't matter. You can always learn from this, which I think is
Yeah.
fascinating. So, again, every time I talk to you, I just feel like I learned something, which is so fascinating, and I love learning. So what would be then for other people that are listening right now or that are going to be listening to this episode, what would you think some wisdom, again, you've gone through some crazy stuff. You've gone through, your health is ripped away.
Mhm.
Your money is stripped away. Your pride, all these things are like gone. And you've been able to come back to a place now where, and I think I was thinking about this when you're telling your story. If other people knew your story, that story in that way, would they look at you differently? And I would say yes, they would look at you a lot differently because you are, yeah, you're leading this church, but what would be some wisdom for other people that are going through scenarios like that? They're going through tough times. Maybe it's not the health, but maybe it's,
Mhm.
a divorce, a bad divorce, or maybe it's,
Yeah.
injuries. Like, what would be some wisdom there that might help
Yeah.
people through these tough times?
Yeah, there's a lot of tough times right now. I mean, we're seeing, unprecedented anxiety and depression and fear and
Mm,
lots of. And I just got another message yesterday, and there's been multiples recently, like suicides, and
yeah.
we're just living in a tough time, man. And I would say to people, actually, don't resist the emptying. Like, I know emptying might feel like a hard word to wrap your mind around, but like what I mean by emptying is when you're living a life that is contrary to your own thoughts, will, and emotions.
Yeah.
Like when
Yeah.
life is coming at you, and what you think, what you want, what you feel, all that's being disregarded, and something completely different is being forced on you by whatever the circumstances are. I would say if I would say that's a moment of revelation. Like
Mm,
that's an opportunity for us to realize, if I'm not authoritative in my life, then what is?
yeah.
Like, and so that's an emptying process, because most of us live most of our lives full of ourselves.
Yeah.
We live most of our lives full of our ideas, our desires, our feelings, our pursuits, our ambitions. And when life throws stuff at it, which it throws stuff at all of us,
Hmm.
we're all going to face pain. We're all going to face difficult situations. And I would say most people try to resist that as much as possible and try to hang on to life, full of themselves as much as they
Mm,
can. You cling to the very last shred of it. And instead, I would just say, open your hands and let it go. And
yeah.
let what's happening to you communicate some new information to you about
Mm,
actually what life is and what it isn't. And that's an emptying process. That's a process of humbling ourselves.
yeah.
That's a process of surrender. That's a process of letting go. And that means you got to let go of people. You can't control anybody else. We
Yeah.
can barely control ourselves. So it's like, you got to let go of people, got to let go
Yeah.
of circumstances, got to let go of
Yeah.
future. And once you
Yeah.
let it go and get down, like you've been talking about, to your why, now I think, and hopefully that's not super attached to your own thoughts, feeling, emotions, but something bigger than you.
Yeah.
If you can find that, like you're going to be able to build in a way that's going to foster joy. You're going to build a life that can contain more joy for you, can hold it longer. Because as long as it's just you, and it's just you and you against the world, and it's just you looking out for you, that's really deep fear. That's a life of chains, actually. That's a really tough way to live. And the
Mhm.
whole world is conspiring against you, and every difficult circumstance is going to knock you down a peg or two.
Mm.
So I'd say I'd invite people to welcome the emptying stuff,
Mm.
to not hide from the pain. One of the things I'm saying to the church pretty regularly these days is like, God isn't trying to love us in spite of pain, loss, disappointment, and betrayal. He's trying to love us through those things. So pain, loss, disappointment, betrayal, like these are not things that like these are not good things, but they're opportunities
Yeah.
for us to experience more love than we probably thought was there.
Totally.
I see it this way. Like Missy had this image, Melissa, my wife, your sister, had this image a while ago. I was going through some really deep fear and really
Mm.
struggling with stuff, and the thing that came to us was just like the what a father does, or a mother does, what a
Mm.
parent does when they got a child who's like, imagine a parent's got a child who's like deeply afraid of the water, for
Mhm.
example. So what does the parent do? Well, he takes the child, holds him close usually, walks out into the water with them, the thing that
Yeah.
they're afraid of, and then starts to lower them. The
Yeah.
kid's throwing a temper tantrum and starts to lower them and just says, "Hey, hey, you're okay. See, you're okay."
Yeah.
Until what? Until the kid calms down. And that's a
Yeah.
parent being a good parent. Because
Yeah.
so like
Yeah.
often we got to realize you need to go through the things you're afraid of, because you
Mm.
can't live in that kind of fear.
Yeah.
And so, not to resist those things, to let yourself be empty, to let yourself move into those scary places. You're afraid of the water. That probably means you're about to get immersed in it. And the whole
Mm.
idea is like you gotta take a breath there. You gotta start breathing. You gotta let go. And if you can do that, now you've just experienced a whole new level of freedom.
Yeah.
And that can lead to great joy. And I think it's just accepting that process over and over and over again is where a lot of life can be found.
Totally. And I think you said it there. It's not that you can't have joy and all these other emotions. You can.
Yeah.
But when you're doing that process, it becomes your container gets bigger. You're like, oh wow, this is, a good example is I started coaching football about 4 years ago again. And I'm like,
Mhm.
oh my God, right? Like it's
Mhm.
so much more like a passion and excitement and joy.
Mhm.
And and on the dance, talking about the dance with fear. I mean, I'm deadly, like I'm afraid of heights. Like I wouldn't stand on my roof unless I absolutely have to. But we
Yeah,
went zip lining about a month ago,
yeah,
300 feet in the air, right?
yeah.
And now I look back and I'm like, okay, it was pretty cool. And still
Mhm.
like still dancing with, still
Mhm.
tough, but I actually did it because of that reason. It was because I
Mhm.
didn't want fear to hold me back.
Yeah,
And I got to appreciate and go, wow, actually, you know what? That feeling was pretty wild. Like, it was
mhm.
pretty cool to do that. So again, it just expands your container, because if
Yeah,
you're only ever on your screen, on your TV, on your phone, you're only experiencing this much of what could be. And even that
yeah,
can be great. And I get it.
yeah,
It's not that that's not nice. It's just
yeah.
like, okay, that's just a part. Like,
Yes.
why not watch the whole movie?
Mhm.
Right? Why
Yeah,
not experience it all and really feel it? And that does come with some pain,
yeah,
right? It does come with some kicking and screaming sometimes and
yeah.
throwing temper
Oh, for
tantrums.
sure. We're
Yeah.
all just little kids in the end of the day, man. We're
Yeah.
all just learning. There's no experts in this thing called life, it's just
Yep.
beginners.
Yeah.
But
That's
we're here
right.
to learn some things, and then it's over. It's over pretty quick. And so
Yeah.
I think it's that real discovery of joy that we're after. And so
Yeah.
there's some things we can learn to get there. I think that's well said. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, like I said, I could keep going on this topic forever. But I know you're busy, man, and you're doing some amazing things out there in Vancouver. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being on the show. And yeah, I really appreciate you.
Yeah, man. You too. It's a pleasure to be here, bro. Love it.
Thanks. So thanks again for listening to this episode. I know I learned so much, and this discussion could have went going on for hours because there's so much wisdom to extract from somebody like this. And the crazy part is, and it's a great reminder, is that not just this person, not just Matt, but there's people in your life that if you really have some humility and just listen and ask the questions, you can learn so much from them. And why not gain more knowledge? Why not listen to their experiences? And it doesn't mean that you're taking everything and saying it's mine. It's just picking what you like and really, learning from those things that they did, trying them on, wear it like a jacket, see if it fits, and see if it's something you can apply in your life. So again, thank you so much for listening. If you haven't yet, please subscribe. Rating the show definitely helps, especially on Spotify. And I'll catch you on the next episode. Bye for now.